Addictions work until they stop working. People turn to that to escape a pain. Then it gets to the point where they can't escape the pain because they've created new pains. Now they've lost all their money, their wife's left them. And now the alcohol, the drugs, whatever it is no longer working. When we're talking about trauma and physical pain and emotional pain, the brain processes emotional pain, specifically social rejection, in the same part of the brain that it processes physical pain. So if I took a cup of hot coffee and I threw it on you, and you're not wearing any clothes, you're laying on the beach, and it suddenly burns the heck out of you and you jump up and scream, the area of the brain that it lights up will be the same part of the brain as if your girlfriend or someone you love just dumped you. The brain views social rejection the same way it views physical pain, which also tells us connections, relationships are critical to our survival, or our brain wouldn't respond to say pain, pain, pain.
What is going on, everybody? Guys, welcome back this week to another amazing, very exciting, very formative, very inspirational episode of The Superhuman Life. As always, guys, I'm your host, Frank Rich, and I just want to start off today by letting you know how incredibly grateful and thankful we're to have you here with us. Guys, episode 117, when I think back 2 years, almost 3 years now, when we launched this show and this mission, probably didn't think we would have reached here. I just had something on my heart. I had a story that I wanted to tell, and man, has this thing evolved and grown. And once again, guys, it's all because of you. So whether this is your first time tuning in, thank you for joining us here today. We hope that this episode speaks to you and helps you unlock something inside of you. But if you're somebody that has been with us since the beginning, I just want to let you know how incredibly thankful and grateful we are to have you. We've seen some tremendous growth in the last couple of months with our downloads, with our listenership, with our ability to bring on some of the most amazing people in the world. And we do it to serve you. We do it to help you unlock something inside of you so you can step into that life that you know you were created to live and create your own superhuman life. Right, guys? So today we have an incredibly amazing guest. It was a referral from our last episode. So we had Chris Burris on, unpacking longevity, talking about ESS 60. I just got my package in the mail. Hopefully you guys were able to check out and pick up some of the My Vital C. But today's guest came highly referred from Chris Burris. So we get into kind of unpacking that relationship with him and Chris, and where did their relationship kind of form, and what's some of the work that they've done together. But joining me on the show today, guys, is none other than Patrick Wanis. Patrick Wanis, PhD, helps people rapidly change their behavior. As a human behavior and relationship expert, Wanis has developed the SRTT therapy, subconscious rapid transformation technique, and is now teaching it to other practitioners all around the world. Wanis has helped people who have experienced trauma, relationship, or family issues. Now, many therapists and psychologists come to Dr. Wanis to help them personally, and they also refer to the clients with him as well. He's developed multiple online psychological and behavioral assessment programs on emotional intelligence, empathy, mindfulness, relationship breakups, self-defeating behavior, individual core values, and authenticity. His clientele ranges from celebrities and CEOs to housewives and teenagers. Wanis is an expert insight and analysis on relationships, sexuality, human motivation, trauma, communication, body language, and therapy. With over 5 million people have read Wanis's books in both English and in Spanish. So like I said, guys, we start off with kind of unpacking the relationship between him and Chris and kind of how did that develop into a working relationship. We then really get deep into early childhood trauma, why so much of what we experience and go through in our adult lives is a result of some things that happened to us. So we really unpack that and ask him a challenging question at the end is, are there people that use trauma as a crutch from taking personal responsibility? We also dive deep into sleep. We touched on sleep with Chris. It's a topic I need to make a full episode about, but we showed some really powerful insights and really powerful statistics on the importance of sleep, guys. And obviously, we touch on the SRTT therapy. So without further ado, guys, let's get into today's conversation with Dr. Patrick Wanis, relationship and trauma therapist, helping you unlock your potential so you can create more service, more value, and more change in the world, guys. Really hope you enjoy today's conversation. Patrick, my brother, welcome to the Superhuman Life.
Thank you for the opportunity, Frank.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been looking forward to this since Chris connected the two of us, which was just last week. It's really fascinating how quickly we're able to turn this around. How did you and Chris get connected? I was noticing in researching for you that you and him have done quite a bit together. There's multiple interviews out there of you guys kind of, speaking, I don't know if you guys have a program or partnership together. So yeah, what's the background with you and Chris, and how did you guys get involved in working together?
Chris Burris and I met in a social context many, many years ago. And because we both had a very similar vision and desire to help people, we ended up doing a lot of work together. He's got companies that are completely separate to what I do. But one of the things that I do is I also present training programs for some of his companies. And I work on an individual basis with many of his employees, whereby he also sponsors me to actually do individual sessions for them. So Chris comes from a perspective of wanting to really help people, wanting to really make a difference, wanting to bring value. And the reason that you noticed, wow, how come there's so many podcasts and interviews and appearances by Patrick and Chris, is because when the pandemic hit, we were having a phone conversation. You'll understand why I'm laughing. And he says to me, "Oh, mate, I'm so tired. I'm really tired. I just don't understand what's going on." And I said, "You realize there's a pandemic, right?" And he'd just forgotten all about it. And I said to him, "Look, you're not the only person. People are experiencing not just fatigue, it's not a physical fatigue, it's a psychological fatigue, whereby we're experiencing a lot of loss, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of confusion, a lot of stress, a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety." And I'd had many people come to me with those same issues. So we decided, let's partner up and see if we can help people, because the greatest impact of the things I just described is a lack of sleep. And a lack of sleep creates this cycle, this loop. If you don't sleep, you'll have many more problems with your emotions, with cognitive functioning, with memory, with your physical body. Sleep is critical to our health, and sleep is a form of medicine. So we ended up getting together and actually spreading a positive message. I created an audio book on how to neutralize the 7 things that are really crippling us right now. And then I also created a guided visualization, which I was giving away to everyone as a gift.
I love that. And I love that sleep is a form of medicine, right? It's something I think so few people really pay attention to. In addition to the podcast and the other coaching that I do, just like you, I'm kind of putting my hand in all different buckets over here. Got a lot of things kind of going on. I was talking with some of my business coaching students yesterday, and it's like working on these habits and working on breakthroughs. And at the end of the day, they're realizing one of their biggest struggles was just due to lack of sleep, pulling 4 or 5 hours. So I really love that. And I think
May
something
I
that
recommend reading the book by Matthew Walker, Why We Sleep?
why we
And if
sleep.
you, yeah, and if you don't want to read the entire book, I did a summary of it in one of my articles on my website, just to try to really get across how critical sleep is, to the extent of heart attacks go up. The percentage of heart attacks go up when daylight savings begins, and the percentage of heart attacks go down when daylight savings ends. The one difference of an hour. And these are just small things. Matthew Walker is a psychologist and neuroscientist who spent a decade doing the research. So it's not just, it's not just some nice platitudes. It's actually based in science.
Yeah, I love that. Appreciate the recommendation. What's like the underlying theme there? Like why do we sleep? Can you summarize it for us here real quickly?
I think the best way to look at it is to say, think about what happens to us when we're asleep. That is our most vulnerable moment. So if you say, oh, if we've been around a long time and we've been sleeping, why have we been doing that when we are truly vulnerable and open to threat? The body, when we are sleeping, there are various states that we go into, various cognitive states. And during those states, the body heals, even deals with some of the emotions. It decides what memories are short term or long term. And then, of course, it engages in regeneration and in the healing process. And contrary to what many people who are either watching or listening to this podcast right now will say, oh, no, 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 I only need 4 or 5 hours sleep. There is only 1% of the population that only needs that short amount of sleep. The rest of us actually need 7 to 9 hours sleep. And even if you think you are functioning well, you're actually not functioning well. And as Chris puts it really well, he says, think of your phone. Your phone has bars that say you've got full signal or you've got limited signal. Our body doesn't tell us, alarm, alarm, you didn't get enough sleep. It just keeps functioning. But what happens to us is we start to dysfunction. So our cognitive skills, our response time, etc., is all impacted by a lack of sleep. We're prone to greater emotional problems. We're prone more to heart attacks, to blood pressure problems, all as a result of a lack of sleep. I'll add this, since we've gotten onto the topic of sleep, that, and this was something that Chris and I really drove home in various podcast interviews, that most of us think, if I'm struggling to sleep, let me go take some sort of sleeping pill. But it's not an actual sleeping pill. It's an unconscious pill. It knocks you unconscious. So you don't get to experience the critical states of sleep. And it's not just, there are different deep states of sleep. And we also need even the time in between those deep states of sleep. So alcohol, even though you think, oh, alcohol is going to put me to sleep, no, it knocks you out. And then halfway through the night, you wake up. Anything that prevents you from having the natural cycle of sleep is really unhealthy. So these so-called sleeping pills actually knock you out unconscious, and you're not experiencing the recuperative, regenerative, restful sleep that you need. That's why people wake up groggy the next day from sleeping pills. They didn't get the sleep they need. And think about that. If you've been on some sort of prescription or prescribed medicine and it involves sleeping pills for a long period of time, you're actually experiencing a lot of harm because you're not getting the sleep you need.
Yeah, this is fascinating. This is not where I thought that we were gonna go today.
Well, let me add one more, because if you challenge me, I want to make sure I respond quickly. And you said, well, why do we sleep? If you think about babies and children, you go, well, it's pretty obvious why they sleep. Why is that? Well, because their body's growing. And actually, teenagers need a lot of sleep. Even though we complain, we go, oh, these teenagers are so lazy. No, actually, teenagers need more sleep at that particular phase in their life. So sleep isn't just about resting. It's about allowing our body to do what it is supposed to be doing, and healing. And as I said, recuperating, regenerating, and even being able to deal with the emotions that we've experienced. Sleep won't heal you of your unresolved issues, but it helps you.
How quickly does lack of sleep or poor sleep begin to impact you negatively? Like, is it one night of poor sleep you're gonna notice
Yes.
it, or okay?
Yes, in fact, again, I don't have the stat in front of me. You'd have to pull it up on the web and go to my website. But I think if once you get past 24 hours, for example, a surgeon who's had less than 6 hours sleep has, from memory, about 160% chance of making a mistake. So you wonder, what, even the way doctors are trained in hospitals, what's their early training? It's about going without sleep.
Yeah.
What a ridiculous format.
Well, SEALs too.
Instead of
I was gonna ask you
encouraging
what you
doctors
thought
to be
about.
healthy.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you what you thought about SEAL training as well, because that's one thing that they do in buds, right? They put them through Hell Week, and a big part of that is the sleep deprivation. And then it's positioned to them that they're training them obviously for battlefield. But I believe what I'm hearing you say is like they're actually setting these soldiers up for failure.
Well, yes, you're right. It's not healthy. There is a difference, though, between being an intern, or being someone that's studying medicine and having to go months and months without sleep, versus SEAL training when it's that final week when you're either going to pass or you're going to fail. Yes, it's not healthy, but they're preparing you. They're testing you to see how will you be able to handle it, because when you're on a battlefield, when you're involved in war, you're not going to have the ideal situation of being able to sleep 7 to 9 hours. But isn't it interesting that, generally speaking, in the military, you do go to sleep early. You are supposed to get a full amount of sleep, and you wake up early.
Absolutely. It's like, so we're going to expose you to the worst possible case scenario, but then we're going to, we're going to structure your lifestyle in a way to where eventually, or hopefully, you're not going to spend a whole lot of time in that circumstance. And I know pilots as well, like they don't let pilots fly if they haven't recorded a proper night's sleep as well. I got a couple friends that fly planes commercially. And I know it's definitely something that they've had to pay attention to in their career. I do want to get to, obviously, the core of your work. Not that sleep in everything that you're doing isn't, but the relationship, trauma therapy, behavioral work as well. I think that's really going to speak to the audience here today. So how did you get into this work? I know it's something that you've done for close to 30 plus years. Originally, what's kind of your your genesis story into this work?
Well, I helped raise my parents. So my parents, not just my parents, but lots of people from a young age. I mean, at age 10, my mother said, don't cry, you're my tower of strength. So she was already signaling, hey, I'm depending on you. Now, I'm not saying this was healthy. This was very unhealthy. So if you're a parent, a mother or father, don't expect your children to make up for what you're missing in your adult relationship. Don't expect your son or your daughter to be the man of the house. I know that this is an expression we've used forever. Now that your dad's gone, you're the man of the house. Now, that wasn't said to me because my dad was there, but he wasn't there, or he was abusive. But when there's a divorce or a separation or a loss or a death, someone will turn around to a boy and say, hey, from now on, you got to take care of your mother. You're the man of the house. Well, let me ask you this, Frank, as an adult, and I don't know your full story of whether you have family or children, but could you seriously turn to a 10-year-old child and expect that that 10-year-old child is going to fulfill your adult emotional needs, or is it in any way going to have the emotional maturity or any form of maturity to be able to take care of you, to protect for you, to provide for you, to understand you, to express compassion, to give you psychological support? You cannot do that as a child. So I wanted to bring that up because that's something that's very common that happens, particularly when families separate. My mother started that by my mid-teen years, or at least towards the end of my teen years. My father was turning to me for advice, which didn't make any sense. He was an engineer, but it made sense in other contexts because he was smart in one area, but he lacked emotional intelligence and couldn't control his emotions. And he would come to me for advice. So I ended up taking on a role which said, oh, if everyone thinks I have the answer, then I guess I should have the answer. Do I have the answer? I'll have the answer. So I ended up doing a lot of studying in psychology and human behavior, but I went many different paths. I also worked in radio and television. I did entertainment. But throughout that time, I was always intrigued by human behavior. And eventually I did a circle and I came back to human behavior, and I got a doctorate in health psychology with a focus on human behavior and hypnosis. And I was doing hypnosis to help people through various issues. And organically, over the last almost 20 years, at least 18 years, I've developed a technique without using hypnosis to get to the root cause of the issue. Almost every issue you have, it doesn't matter what it is: anxiety, fear, lack of self-confidence, stress eating, some sort of eating disorder, being in an unhealthy relationship, having some sort of addiction, some sort of obsessive compulsive disorder. Every one of these behavioral responses is driven by a subconscious belief. So, for example, if any client comes to me or is referred to me, because I have a lot of therapists that refer clients to me for trauma work or for addiction recovery. So sometimes if someone comes to me and they've got a drinking problem, I'll say, look, it's really simple. The reason that you turn to alcohol or drugs or whatever it is to escape a pain. What is the pain that you're running away from? And you go, can it really be that simple? Yes, it can. Now, of course, once you get into the drugs, if you're into cocaine or crack, now that's creating a physical dependency. But you turn to that first because you knew it was going to help you to escape. There is a quote, and I wish I had it off the top of my head. It's on one of the articles I wrote, and it was by a famous musician who became addicted to heroin because he said in the moment that he took that heroin, he'd never experienced such peace. It just completely removed all of the pain, all of the pain. So everything that we do is always driven by some subconscious belief. I'll just use an example from a new client yesterday who's in a relationship where she's miserable. And I said to her, are you miserable? And her challenge is stress eating. So now she's eating really poorly. She's putting on lots of weight. She's not going to the gym. And I said, so based on what you've just told me, you've told me that 6 months ago you should have ended this relationship. Why haven't you? Lo and behold, we get to the answer of guilt. Where does the guilt come from? Oh, because she was raised with guilt by her mother. So she holds herself responsible for other people's actions and never thinks she's doing enough. So see how even this foundation of guilt controlling you even affects your relationships, whereby you're afraid to get out of the relationship because you're going to feel guilty that you've gotten out of the relationship or you've broken up with this person. As far as addictions are concerned, I have a client who had a problem with porn addiction. And in his situation, it was really obvious. And I said to him, look, the pain you're escaping away from, or you're trying to escape from, is loneliness, that you can't connect to people. The problem is the more that you continue engaging in porn, the lonelier you will become, the more isolated and disconnected you'll become. So for him, to help him, we focus on what is the block between him connecting with other people? What's the fear? What is the fear? And usually, most of our fear when it comes to relationships is rejection. It's not the only one, but it's usually rejection. It can be fear of abuse. It can be fear of not getting our emotional needs met. It can be fear of being taken advantage of. But there's always a fear. And fear of rejection is a very strong one. So if there's a part of you that believes you're not good enough, you're not significant, you're not valuable, you've got nothing to contribute, even if you are contributing in a career sense, if you feel that you don't have that value, then you're going to hide. You're going to try and run and escape. But even with something like porn addiction, there could be some other pain too. Some other pain that you're running away from. You could have experienced sexual abuse. Oh, here's an example. So I had a 19-year-old client, 19. And I don't even recall what the first thing he came to me for was, but he, in the second or third session, he said to me, look, I've got a bit of a problem with porn. And I said, yes. And he said, I watch MILF porn. He said, do you know what that is? And I said, yes, I've heard of it. And this was connected to his relationship with his mother. So we had to heal the relationship with his mother so that he stopped turning to older women in porn.
Is it kind of a dominating, like Oedipal situation with mom there?
Yeah, I don't use the term Oedipal, but I understand where you're coming from. It's a situation where a father was never present. This kid, I remember now why he came because he'd experienced sexual abuse. He experienced sexual abuse from a sister, and I think from an older cousin, from an older sister and a cousin. So you'd be surprised that, yes, women also engage in sexual abuse of boys, not just older men. But in his situation, his mother was completely dominant and controlling. So it was as if it's what I refer to as emotional incest, whereby the mother is turning to the boy for this emotional connection. But sometimes there can also be this heightened sexual tension and energy between them, which isn't created by the boy, it's created by the adult, in this case, the mother, whereby she would start to, squeeze his back if he had acne. And he'd say, what are you doing? And she says, well, it's my back. I mean, she literally referred to his back as if it was part of her body. So this boy had no delineation. There is another term for it. It's called enmeshment. This is whereby your identity and your parents' identity or whoever else's identity is enmeshed. Just like, oh, here we are. The same way my fingers are meshed together. The two identities are enmeshed. And now the child has no idea about what is his identity. Where does his identity begin and end? And where does his mother or father's identity begin and end? So again, I'm circling to what we started with, which is every one of our behaviors has a beginning, and it's usually in our childhood, and it's usually connected to something that happened to us or something that didn't happen. So it's not just about whether you were abused or sexually abused or beaten. It could also be that your parents just weren't present. They didn't give you any attention. They may not have invalidated you, but they may just have never validated you. So therefore you felt invisible. And now you're constantly trying to make up for it. So everyone, look at me, how great I am. Or perhaps your parents just showed no interest in you. Or perhaps your parents never showed you any affection. So they may never have been abusive, but perhaps they never showed you any affection. So therefore, now that's another need that isn't met. So we're all affected by the things that were done to us and the things that we missed out on. I wrote an article just a couple of weeks ago on 60 things that every child needs. And one client said to me, 60? And I said, well, read them. Now there's a theme there, there's an umbrella, but you'd be surprised at what we need that we don't get. Acknowledgement, appreciation, recognition, validation, support, encouragement, boundaries, discipline, guidance, life lessons, education, teachings, physical touch, physical love and affection, even being adored and celebrated. And this happens both with boys and girls, whereby, so for example, one client, his pain was caused because his parents really wanted a girl. They didn't want another boy, they wanted a girl. So he grew up being not effeminate, but sometimes tempted to dress like a woman, trying to subconsciously get the attention of his father. And I know you're thinking, this is absolutely absurd, but all of these subconscious beliefs happen in the mind of a child, not just the brain of a child, but the mind of a child.
How do you decipher between the two? Like, what's the difference there between brain and mind in the way that you're using it here?
That's a really good question. So your brain is the organic matter. Your brain is the part that's going to create the fear. It doesn't matter what you believe or how you've been trained, your brain will experience fear because it's instinctually we're designed for survival and reproduction. So if I'm sitting here and talking to you and someone suddenly goes like that, I will jump. But that's not a subconscious thought. It's not even an unconscious response. It's a non-conscious response. By the time that I've been able to process that sound, my brain, not my mind, my brain has said danger and it's triggered. Now, how do we say, okay, well, Patrick, okay, I get it. That's the brain. What about the mind? Give me an example of the mind and fear. Well, let's say, I'll give my dad's example. So when my dad was 14, his father caught his wife, my dad's mother, cheating. So he drags this kid into the room. In fact, I think he was only about 12. Drags him into the bedroom and sees his mother having sex with another man. And the father says to the son, see, that's what your mother's like. My dad grows up with all of this trauma. And ever since that day, he could never, ever let my mother dress in black because his mother was dressed in black at the time. So we can have fearful responses, responses of anxiety based on past experiences, which is different to the brain. There are certain things in the brain where it'll automatically respond out of fear, loud noises, anytime that we're startled. But the fear that most of us experience is really based more on not something that's organic, but something that we've experienced in the past. And it could be a long time ago. So it could be the fear of abandonment, the fear of neglect, which happened because we experienced abandonment and neglect as a child, or the fear of authority because your father was abusive, or the fear of being rejected because your parents rejected you in one way or another, or the fear of not getting our emotional needs met because you never got your emotional needs met as a child. So there is a very strong distinction, but obviously that fear that from experiences now becomes part of the brain in the sense that the only way we have that fear in our mind is that it creates a neural pathway, and that neural pathway also becomes a habit. Like, how do you know how to tie your shoelaces? Because your brain created a neural pathway and said, this is how it's done. Imagine if every day you had to learn how to tie your shoelaces. So the brain's function of learning things quickly and then creating habits and creating grooves in the brain or neural pathways is to try and help us to perform better or to survive. The other thing I'd add, Frank, is I'm sure you've heard of the term neuroplasticity, which basically means, it doesn't mean the brain's plastic, it means the brain's moldable. But neuroplasticity doesn't just happen when you book a session with Patrick Wanis
or Frank Rich
for therapy.
Because that's a lot of the work that we do is centered around neuroplasticity. But yeah, please.
Right. Well, see if you agree with me on this. And neuroplasticity happens every single moment of the day. The conversation we're having now is also working on our brain. And it's one thing to neutralize a thought, put in another thought, but the moment that you start engaging in the action, you start also creating dendrites. So it's one thing to create a new pathway, it's another thing to create cells. So the brain is constantly being reprogrammed or remolded, almost literally, based on our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions. So you're constantly reprogramming yourself. So if you end up, let's say you're feeling overwhelmed and there's some emotional pain that you're not able to handle, and you turn to the computer, and now perhaps you start watching porn. Now you're creating, if you do it a second time and a third time and a fourth time, you're now creating a neural pathway. Now you're molding your brain to say, when I need to escape from pain, that's where I'm going to go.
Oh, this is so good. So good, because this is right in line with obviously the work that we're doing. I want to circle back here more to children though, and parenting and upbringing. And there may not be an actual answer to this question, but the way I hear you talking, it's like, a lot of what we experience and live and think, and some of our habits, and obviously our addictions are rooted in past traumas. Maybe trauma is not really the word there, but growing up with or without something. I guess where I'm like, the question I'm trying to piece together here is there a way as a parent, like, you could create a maybe not perfect environment, but like, how would you go as far as parenting and leading children to control as much as you possibly can? Is it possible, or is the outcome of childhood always going to lead you to needing some type of subconscious therapy. Did the question make sense?
Yes, it did. There's a few different questions. So you said first you talked about addiction or other habits of today going back to trauma. Then you sort of said, no, maybe not trauma. It's referred to as adverse childhood experiences, ACE. And there are 10 primary adverse childhood experiences. Even the experience of poverty, which actually isn't necessarily listed in the ACE test, is also an adverse childhood experience that can therefore create all sorts of adult issues. So, number one, understand that there is trauma and there's also adverse childhood experiences. A divorce by your parents may not be traumatic, but it could be an adverse childhood experience that therefore impacts the way that you feel about yourself and the way that you interact with relationships. Perhaps you don't trust people. So that's number one. Number two, you talked about, well, what's good parenting? Is there such a thing as perfect parenting? There is nothing you could ever do that would make you a perfect parent for two reasons. One, you're a human being and you're imperfect. Two, the child's a human being and imperfect. And three, which I failed to mention, but I will now, children see the world through their own egocentric perspective. So children believe, if I'm a child, I say, I'm the center of the universe. Everything revolves around me. What do you mean I can't go? Why do I have to go to bed early? Why can't I have more ice cream? Why do I have to do this? Why do I have to do that? No, I want to do it now. No, I want to stay here now. Well, why are they doing that? Because they think they're the only ones that exist. They're the center of the universe. There's good parts to it, and there's obviously bad parts. The really bad part to that is that, for example, when parents divorce, a child will innately, unfortunately, blame him or herself. So children say, if my mum or dad is angry, it must be because of me. I must have done something wrong. They don't understand my dad's an alcoholic, my dad's stressed out, my mum's got this issue, my mum's got that issue, my mum was abused as a child. They don't know all that. They just say, if my mum doesn't love me, or if my mum's doing something that doesn't show me love, therefore, inaccurate interpretation, I must be unlovable. So children will make those conclusions that are obviously highly inaccurate conclusions and interpretations of the event. So yes, it all starts in childhood. The first 2 years, or even the 2 years, 5 and 8 are the most critical 3 phases. In the first 2 years, if you get your emotional needs met, if the parents turn to you when you're crying and they hold you and they comfort you and they're gentle with you, they attend to your physical and emotional needs, then you'll have what we call a healthy, secure attachment style. But if your mum or dad, whoever was a primary caretaker, was stern, dismissive, didn't attend to your needs, said, no, let him cry in the crib, he'll be fine, he needs to learn, then you'll grow up with an insecure attachment style. And maybe you'll run away from relationships. Or maybe when you get intimate, you'll run away. Or you'll be dismissive. Or you'll be avoidant of relationships. So I still want to answer your question about, well, what can parents do? If we accept that there's no such thing as perfect parenting, is there at least something that represents excellence in parenting? Yes, there is. And again, I'll refer to this article that talked about the 60 things that every child needs. But let me put it this way. The role of a parent is to give everything that the child needs so that he or she can realize his or her full potential. So the role of the parent is to give, the role of the child is to receive. Therefore, don't make your son the man of the house, and don't think that your daughter is going to make up for your wife that left you, because they can't meet your adult emotional needs. So that's number one. Number two, do everything you can to see the world through the eyes of your child. Then help them to see the world through your eyes. But begin first by seeing the world through your eyes. See, Frank, I'm sure you and I have forgotten all about what you were like, what I was like when we were 12 years of age. Like, oh, bloody hell, that was a long time ago. I don't remember what I was like when I was 12. But I remember I was actually teaching at Unity Church in Houston a very long time ago. And I was teaching, and we were having some sort of meeting, all the adults. And I was saying to them, you need to remember what you were like at age 12. That's the only way that you can begin to understand your 12-year-old. You're looking at them and thinking they're a mini adult. No, they're not a mini adult. They're a 12-year-old child. Their brain hasn't fully developed. Their body hasn't fully developed. Their hormones are still developing. So they're going to have a lot of physiological and biological changes. And then you're forgetting about the psychological changes and the fear that they have and what their needs are. So you set out to see the world through your child's eyes. Here's another one. Stop comparing one sibling with another sibling. Stop comparing that sibling to the next door neighbor or to who you were when you were a child or to who you wish you were or what you wish you were or what you wish you became. Your child's not there to fulfill your lack. Yes, you might say, look, I want a child to fulfill my life. Yes, so that's so that you can love someone and do something meaningful. But your child's not there to make up for the abuse you got or for the fact that you didn't have toys when you were a kid or for the fact that your mum didn't love you. Your child isn't your therapist, so don't make them your therapist. When I said about stop comparing them to this sibling or to that sibling, I have another client, and incidentally, all of these are male, interestingly. Not that they're the only ones, but maybe it happens more to boys. So he had no interest in sport, but his two brothers were great at sport. So mum and dad continued to, if berate isn't the right word, they definitely criticize him because he wasn't interested in sport. But this kid was a genius in other ways. So the parents didn't sit down and say, hey, Johnny, you don't want to play football? No. Are you sure? Why not? Because I don't like it. Really? What don't you like about it? It doesn't interest me, mum. Okay. Well, what does interest you? What do you like? Oh, I see you're reading a book. What's the book you're reading? So you like books. Oh, you want to do this. Well, let me see how I can help you to do this. Let me go get these books for you. If you really want to study engineering, I'll go get books for engineering. Or let's go here, let's go there, let's go to the museum. Now what I'm doing is, instead of trying to mold my kid to what I think he should be, I'm actually tapping into, connecting to, who is this person inside already? Because there is a formation. The personality that we have is a combination of genetics or DNA, as well as the nurturing and the environment. So it's sort of three: the way that you interact with a child and the environment. But if you're a father or a mother listening to this podcast and you've got children, you'll know that each child is distinctively different. And you go, how is that possible? The same two parents, but these three children are completely different because they're not copies of you. And maybe your youngest daughter has actually inherited the personality, the interests, and some of the passions of your grandmother or great grandmother. Or perhaps your son is more like your uncle and you don't know why. It's just the way it is. So look in the individual, seek to understand them. Children need to be heard, understood, and validated. When children are heard, understood, and validated, then they feel seen. And if you connect with your child and you have a real connection and you see them as who they are, you're still going to need to guide them to find out who they are, because once 12 comes through, age 12 begins through about 17, they're all wondering, who the heck am I? What's my purpose? Am I this? Am I that? Should I dress this way, dress that way? Today, we've even got gender confusion. So you want to help them, guide them, but there is a foundation there. And some children will be introverts, some children will be extrovert. And that's by nature. You didn't make them that way unless they were abused and therefore they became more introverted, even though that may not be in their personality. I have a client, and he's the father of one child. And I don't recall how this came to me, but as we're doing the process, I do this process called SRTT, Subconscious Rapid Transformation Technique. And it suddenly hit me, and I said to him, you're highly physical. You're actually more physical than you are cerebral. And he pauses and he goes, wow. And he says, yeah, my parents never let me do sport. And whatever the details were, so he never got to express himself physically. Oh, because his mother was afraid, always afraid that he might get hurt. So she put him in cotton wool, like a little fragile shell. So he never got to do what he really wanted to do. So children need to be seen, heard, understood, and validated. See them as an individual. Don't try to make them what you want them to be. Don't try to compensate for what you didn't get or for what you wish you had. And then the next thing is, do your children feel adored by you? Do you adore your children, and do you celebrate your children? This tends to be something that happens more with women than men, that if both parents don't adore them or celebrate them, they feel really, really unloved. But it can apply to both children. Like, I don't know if you, Frank, have a dog, but if you have a dog, when you come home, the first thing your dog does, as soon as you open the door, barks, jumps all over you, wants to lick you, kiss you, and runs around in circles, the tail's wagging in the air. You're like, oh my God, I'm exhausted already. What's the dog doing? The dog's showing you how excited he or she is to see you, to be with you. The dog is celebrating your arrival at home. Now, what happens when your husband or your wife comes home? Do you celebrate them? What happens when your children arrive home? Just go, hi, son. How you doing, mate? Good. Yeah, okay. Yeah, there's some milk in the fridge. Or do you actually go, stop, let me go give my attention. Let me tell my husband, my wife, how excited I am to see them, how happy I am to see them. But we don't do that. And so therefore we are withholding our love. And that's the other thing. So do you adore and celebrate your children? And do you actually show them love and affection? Or are you a person that believes that you should be completely stoic, showing no emotion whatsoever? And children need emotion. In fact, we all need it. We all need to feel that love, and love is expressed in multiple ways. But we definitely need physical touch, caressing, hugging, kissing, stroking. And if you think, oh, I'm a man, and if I hug and kiss my son, he's going to grow up and be a pansy or a sissy or all the derogatory terms, it's actually the opposite. Your child will end up being more masculine if you, as a father, show love and physical touch and affection to your
Patrick,
son.
what's your thought on the
Why?
on the root of that way of thinking for men? Is that generational, like a certain generation due to upbringing? That's just how men were portrayed, and that's something that they needed to be due to just the time of the year. So yeah, what's the cause of that thing? I feel it's definitely changing, and I think that obviously, hopefully, this podcast and many others that we're involved in is really leading that conversation and leading that movement, because I do think that is something that we need to see a lot more of, is just men not sharing their emotions from a place of weakness, but just sharing it from a place of, like, these are all part of the human experience, and to deny that you're experiencing and feeling them is actually denying yourself a part of life. So yeah, what's your thoughts on the root of that thinking for men?
So the fear to express your emotions, if you're a man, is generational, it's cultural, and it can also be religious. It could also be the way your parents were too. But generally, yes, it's generational and it's also cultural. And I say that because, for example, in the building I live in, there's a lot of Latins, and the younger generation of fathers openly express affection to their sons and daughters, completely openly. They're hugging and kissing their children and lifting them up, and so is the mother. So this child is being showered with love. So therefore, the child's going to have a healthy attitude towards relationships and a healthy understanding of their own value. The other fear that we have regarding the expression of emotions is, yes, because these caricatures were created by society, whether it was partially the result of religion or advertising or marketing that said, this is the man, it's the Marlboro man, or it's Schwarzenegger, it's Terminator. He has no emotion, which was actually really interesting. He shows no emotion. Or Spock, there's no emotion shown, it's pure logic. And if you show emotion, therefore you are now on the weaker side of gender or sex. You're now the female, and therefore we're going to look down upon you. So that also relates to whether you believe that women are weak and inferior because they show emotion. The problem's not showing emotion, it's when the emotion controls you that it becomes a problem. Now, interestingly, there is a scripture that talks about women as being the weaker feminine vessel. So even religion can teach you that, because it said the weaker feminine vessel. And I even had a client just last week who was talking about strength and weakness. And I said, do you have a definition? See, her father said to her, now this is interesting to be a father to a daughter. She couldn't show any emotion, because to him that was a sign of weakness. So she couldn't even show emotion. And I said, well, what is the definition of strength and weakness? She said, I don't know, I don't even have one. I said, you do, you're just not consciously aware of it. You can't articulate it. But your definition of weakness is the actual portrayal or display of emotion. To the extent of your definition of weakness means I must not even feel an emotion. I must not recognize, acknowledge, or validate an emotion. Now, what's the problem with that? Then you end up with things like heart attacks. Then you end up with things like stroke. Then you end up with things like anxiety, because you haven't been taught how to cope with the emotions you experience. You haven't been taught, as you beautifully put it, Frank, this is the human experience. And guess what? It doesn't matter how tough you are, how macho you are. You could be Arnold Schwarzenegger at his peak. You could be 25 and be Mr. Olympia 20,000 times and have the best body in the world, but you are still going to experience intense pain and suffering and intense joy and elation, because that's part of the human experience. What kind of man is not going to cry over the death of his son or the death of his child, What kind of man is not going to cry when he sees extraordinary injustice? What kind of man is not going to get on the floor and suffer with his friend when his friend is suffering? What kind of man is going to go to war and say, "Oh no, I feel nothing"? If you speak to more people that have experienced war, they say the primary thing that drives them isn't even the patriotism of the country. It's about taking care of their buddy, taking care of their partner, the guy that's in it with them. And then we have this fear of, well, if I show physical affection to this man, if I put my arm around him, I give him a hug, if I hug him heart to heart, that means my left side to his left side, therefore I'm gay and I'm going to get an erection. No, you're not. It just means you care about someone. It doesn't always lead to sex. And nor does it mean that you're going to become sexually excited. And then you got to say, what's your greatest fear? The only reason you'd be afraid of hugging someone because you think, oh, that could be gay, is that you're afraid that maybe you are gay. So now you're afraid of even accepting yourself. So to me, it's accept everything about you, and then you can decide what you want to change. The first thing I'm going to say is, bloody hell, I'm really angry and I'm really frustrated. I'm really, really effing angry and frustrated. Okay, wow. Why am I so angry and frustrated? What do I want to do about it? Do I want to hurt someone? Do I want to hurt myself? Do I want to just smash something? How is this going to help me? What can I do with that anger? And incidentally, Frank, on that point of emotions, this is really powerful stuff, as they say. With the exception of one emotion, every emotion is actually lessened in its intensity by, number one, identifying what that emotion is, sadness, and two, connecting with someone to share that emotion. The difference is anger. The more that I vent to you, the worse I'll make the anger. But if I express my sadness to you, it will actually lessen the pain and the suffering. But anger, which is catabolic, not anabolic, and it'll keep destroying and breaking down your body, will continue doing that the more that you feed anger. So don't feed anger. You have to be aware that anger really is a poison. It's literally a poison in your body because unless you are running. So remember, the fight, flight, freeze response are there for a reason to help us to survive. When I'm running or when I'm fighting, and now my brain's in the fight response, and all the blood's in the end of my limbs, and I'm fighting to protect myself, that anger is needed. I need to harness that energy and harness that anger to protect myself. But if I'm driving and now I've got road rage because this person just jumped in front of me, the first thing you do is you're releasing adrenaline, norepinephrine and epinephrine in your body. And if you are not burning that, it is a poison in your body. That's why we in Western society are so sick, because we're constantly releasing all of these chemicals in our body in a context that is not appropriate. If I'm playing racquetball, if I'm sprinting, I need that adrenaline. If I'm playing football, if I'm playing baseball, soccer, whatever the game and the sport is, and I need adrenaline, great, I'm burning it. I'm using the adrenaline to drive my body. But if I'm sitting at the desk and I'm cussing at someone on the phone, or if I'm in the car and I'm cussing and shouting and screaming, the adrenaline is not being utilized. I'm just creating more adrenaline in my body that's more of a poison, and it's poisoning me. So become aware of the emotions. Connecting with someone, sharing your pain will ease your pain. It doesn't make you weaker, and here's why. I believe and I teach it takes so much more courage and strength to admit this, in this specific thing, I cannot do it. I cannot do it alone. I cannot do it anymore. I need help. I need support. I need guidance. I need someone to show me. I need someone to encourage me. I'm feeling discouraged. I can't get out of bed, whatever it is. That takes more strength than you go, oh, no, I'm fine, I'm fine. And then you end up completely losing your whole life because you've screwed up your whole life because you refuse to accept help from anyone. And now you're either physically sick or you're addicted or you've done something to self-sabotage and self-destruct your life.
Tips for people that want to step into their fear, whether it's the fear of approaching a girl at the gym or, at a coffee shop, or the fear of, maybe starting the online business, or the fear of going into the boss's, office and asking for a raise, or the fear of having the difficult conversation with your spouse or partner. I'm just giving you a couple of different examples of, I believe, what are probably very regular fears that most people are dealing with. So what are some practical first steps, tips that people can take to begin to lean into and step into their fear?
Well, let's distinguish between fear and anxiety, because sometimes we confuse the two. Anxiety is when you feel or believe your world is out of control and you're trying to control something that you can't. So number one, get clear about what you can control and what you can't control. So anxiety is that response. When you are trying to control things like trying to control your partner, and you can't control your partner because you can't control anyone other than yourself. Fear is the anticipation of pain. It's usually the expectation of something going wrong. So it's always set in the future. I'm afraid this bad thing will happen. The more that you stay in the present moment, the less fear you experience. Now, there are also different types of fears, because you talked about the fear of going up to a girl. That's the fear of rejection. Going up to a boss for a raise, that's also the fear of rejection. But then there's other fears about doing something new, which can be simply a lack of belief in one's own capabilities. So I define confidence as comprising two elements. I've done this before, so therefore I can do it again. Or I've done something similar before.
That's
therefore I can do it
competence or
again.
confidence?
Or competence
Got it.
leads to confidence. The second part of confidence, this is also weird, and this is a good distinction, Frank. The second part of confidence is no matter what happens, I'll be okay. So even if I'm incompetent in this particular field, I'll be okay because I'll learn from it. Now, let's still keep focusing on answering your question about fear. What are the tips for dealing with fear? First, get clear about what is the actual fear. If I'm afraid to go up to that girl, I'm afraid of rejection. Now, deal with the root cause. Now, you can argue it logically and say, what's the worst thing that happens? You're going to tell me to F off? No, you're ugly, you're stupid, whatever. I still don't have a date and I've walked away. Someone's maybe said something bad about me, or maybe they just said, no, thanks, I got a boyfriend. Or please, I'd like to keep reading my book. If you believe that the rejection of one person defines you, then you'll be controlled by that fear. Again, there might be some other root cause. Maybe at a subconscious level, you just don't think you're good enough. So then you got to deal with that root cause. The fear of going to a boss and asking for a raise, I'd say, well, what are you afraid of? What's he going to do? He or she, your boss, is either going to say yes or no, or they're going to tell you the truth and they're going to say, listen, we actually need to talk about your performance. I don't think you've been performing well. Oh, so you're going to hear the truth. Or they're going to say, mate, right now we don't have a budget, but I'm happy to work with you. Or they'll say, look, I'll lead the case for you and I'll go and speak to my superiors and see what I can do. That's the fear of asking. That's the fear of being told no. That's the fear that you've already decided that you're not good enough. That's the fear, again, where you believe someone else is going to determine your value. So I don't know that there's just one tip for fear. Yes, you've probably heard the many expressions, which is feel the fear and do it anyway, which was a book by a woman. Or it's, keep exposing yourself to the fear. Those don't always work. Sometimes they do, but they don't work in every context. Because if you've experienced trauma and you're in a relationship and you're having an argument, this has happened to me. This is why I know this beyond my work with clients. That one time I was having an argument with a then girlfriend, and unknowingly she triggered past trauma. There was no way I could move through that fear. I became frozen. I went into that flight response, almost the freeze response, actually, where I got cold. My body went cold. I felt cold and I was shivering and I almost couldn't move and I couldn't speak. So there are some fears that relate to trauma, to relate to childhood trauma, because I'd experienced various forms of abuse. So you've got to look at every fear in its context and say, ultimately, what am I afraid of? Now, the next step, what is the worst that could happen? And now let's talk about competence. Whatever is the worst that can happen, I'll know how to deal with it. And you go, well, that sounds good, but will you? Okay, what is the worst that could happen? I go and ask my boss for a raise and he fires me. Well, then what happens? Then I don't have a job. Then what happens? Oh, I'll lose my house. And then what happens? I'll lose this and that. And you go all the way down. This is called the worry buster technique. You go all the way down to whatever it is. And then you say, okay, so if I lose my house, will I find a way to survive? Yes, I will. That's really what it is. You've got to face the ultimate fear, because the fear really isn't just necessarily about the boss rejecting you. You might have a fear of losing your job or losing your reputation. Oh, what will people think of me when I say I asked the boss for a raise and he said no? Look at your fears and you'll recognize that the majority of those are way beyond your control. And you're worrying about things over which you have no control. And the more fear that you drive and the more you worry, the more anxiety you'll
Yeah, and that's why I think I mean, I don't, it's not a definition. I think it's more of of an acronym here, but I think one of the best ways to summarize or define fear is false evidence appearing real. It's like we're afraid of this moment, but like you said, when you reverse engineer it back all the way to the root, at the bottom sitting there is most oftentimes just a lack of confidence. And I always say your self-confidence is built and kept by keeping the small promises you make to yourself. So you want to be able to handle fear. Begin keeping the small promises that you're making yourself and become a more confident and competent individual, and then expose yourself to difficult things on a consistent and daily basis. And you'll quickly realize that these little things that you've been fearful of or afraid of in life are, they're not going to disappear, but your ability to lean into them and handle them is just obviously going to continue to grow. I wanted to ask you about trauma here. Is trauma always does it always happen at a biological level? Because when you were talking about it there in that example, it's like you talked about, the cold, the hot, the anxiety, kind of the sweaty palms. I feel sometimes, and this is probably more recent, and maybe it's due to social media, podcasts like this. I see people using trauma as a crutch many times, and this is just my opinion. I love your thoughts and takes on here. But as we kind of discussing childhood and upbringing and parenting, if you're a human adult, you've gone through, in my opinion, some form of trauma. Now, obviously, there's much more intense, severe trauma that can lead to perhaps some of these biological experiences that are reminding you of those past traumas. But I feel that there's beginning to be a wave of individuals or a wave of people, and it's almost becoming like societally accepted for you to just say, I'm this way because of my traumatic experiences. So what's your experience? What's your thought kind of on what I'm putting together here? Is it always going to happen out of biological experience? And are you seeing people using trauma as a crutch from really just taking responsibility for their life?
Well, I think you summed it up in that last part of the question. Are you seeing people that are using trauma as an excuse to fail to take responsibility for their life? So I do 100% support and endorse the work and the teachings of Jocko Willink, which is extreme ownership, which simply means accept responsibility for everything that happens in your life. Now, I'm not to blame for what my mother or father did or didn't do, but I'm responsible for what I'm going to do with my life now, and whether I'm going to say, listen, I'm screwed up. It's not a clinical term, but I'm screwed up because I got this fear and that fear, and I got anxiety, and I can't have a relationship, and I can't hold down a job. I need to go get help. Okay, so I've accepted responsibility. This is where I am. I know that this was the cause, but I'm not going to keep blaming them because there's nothing they can do. So number one, take full responsibility for everything in your life, and you'll actually experience less fear and less anxiety because now you recognize you have greater control in your life. So that's number one. Number two, trauma is both a physical and a physiological response to a perceived or real threat, to an actual or perceived threat. So if I'm a child and my dad's constantly threatening to hit me, or he does hit me, my body is going to respond because my brain says, this is where the neurology comes in, danger, danger, your life is in danger. So my body goes into a fight, flight, freeze, or one more to add, feign response. This is the response that happens by either boys or girls who get sexually abused on a regular or frequent basis. They end up feigning a response. That means going along with it as if they're okay with it, as if they're enjoying it, as another way to cope and as another way to survive. I have many clients, tend to be more women than men, who from age 7 or 8 to about 13 to 15 were sexually abused almost on a weekly or regular basis, either by the father or by an uncle or someone, or a stepfather or a boyfriend. And it stopped only when the girl got to the age where she could physically fight back. But she feigned a response. She kept going along with it because she was afraid for her life. When she no longer was afraid for her life, she fought back at age 13 through to 15, and it stopped. So our brain responds to the perceived threat or to the actual threat. It affects our brain architecture. The younger we are, the more trauma we experience, or the more adverse childhood experiences we have, the more the architecture of our brain is affected. And then it's easy for things to trigger the fight, flight, or freeze response. And it can also be just the result of a memory. If your father, for example, was holding a red baseball bat and he used to hit you with a red baseball bat, you might see something red and have anxiety or fear. or you might have fear when you see a baseball bat. So there is a neurological response. Our body does respond. What eventually happens is that we might become more prone to stress. We might have less coping skills. And when we are under stress, those former traumatic experiences come to the forefront. But no, I don't endorse anyone who simply says, that's my trauma. You might use that as a way to explain your response, but don't use it as a way to justify your response. There's a difference. If I say, I'm sorry for the way I shouted and screamed at you. I experienced abuse as a child, and so sometimes I lose control, and I know it's wrong, and I promise you I'm going to do something about it so I can not do it again. So I've accepted responsibility, but I'm not saying, well, because I experienced trauma, therefore you can't ever complain if I'm angry or abusive or if I treat you poorly. But trauma is serious. It affects people. I've got clients that are 60 years of age who for the first time in their life are dealing with trauma at age 4, but it's affected their whole life, Frank. And some of them, it created extraordinary destruction in their life, whether it was addiction or gambling or broken relationships, failed marriages, failed businesses. It's because they never healed that trauma. And the trauma then led them to turn to other behaviors to try to ease the psychological, emotional pain, sometimes even the physical pain. And as a result, that created new problems. Addictions create new problems that weren't there before. And as I used to work in a rehab clinic in Malibu, and the actual owner of that clinic, who wasn't a therapist, said it to me beautifully one day. He said, Patrick, addictions work until they stop working. I went, what the heck does that mean? And he said, Patrick, as you've said, people turn to that to escape a pain. Then it gets to the point where they can't escape the pain because they've created new pains. Now they've lost all their money, their wife's left them. And now the alcohol, the drugs, whatever it is no longer working. The other thing I wanted to share, Frank, quickly, which I think is really important when we're talking about trauma and physical pain and emotional pain, the brain processes emotional pain, specifically social rejection, in the same part of the brain that it processes physical pain. So if I took a cup of hot coffee and I threw it on you, and you're not wearing any clothes, you're laying on the beach, and it suddenly burns the heck out of you and you jump up and scream, the area of the brain that it lights up will be the same part of the brain as if your girlfriend or someone you love just dumped you. The brain views social rejection the same way it views physical pain, which also tells us connections, relationships are critical to our survival, or our brain wouldn't respond to say pain, pain, pain. So if you're actually experiencing a crisis of emotional pain, you can actually take a Tylenol. Studies have shown that a Tylenol will help. It's not going to heal you of your issues, but if it's a crisis, rather than taking medication for the rest of your life that's now going to change your brain and your chemical balances, you can try just taking a Tylenol, just if it's a crisis. And I've written about that, and I'm not recommending, I don't take any medication, incidentally, but I do say to my clients, listen, if your girlfriend just broke up and you're a mess and you can't sleep and you're constantly crying, this is a crisis. Take a Tylenol.
Yeah,
Let me
and
know
then
how
still
you feel.
work to get to
And it just eases
the
the
root
pain.
of all these issues and heal and process and all that. But for a short-term fix there,
Yeah.
absolutely. Patrick, wow, this has been quite a conversation. We didn't answer any of the questions that I had written up for us. It's not your
I'm
fault.
sorry.
I mean, obviously this was tremendously valuable and we touched on so many important things, but I'd be open to having you back on because I definitely want to get in some of the relationship stuff, the intimacy side of things. And I think obviously that'd be incredibly valuable. So we'll connect and possibly get you back on here as well. But I think that this is what we needed, right? Like I told you at the beginning, I wanted to let the conversation guide us where we were going to go today. And I think to sleep, I think the childhood trauma, the parenting, the healing of our own personal trauma, the responsibility piece, everything that we touched on was obviously wildly important. I want to get your blog shared because you referenced multiple articles in this conversation, and I see it's something you've been working on. It appears you drop a blog per week. So guys, I'll share that down in there in the show notes. And then Patrick, if people want to connect with you or maybe learn more about the work that you're doing, where you're hanging out online social, I don't know if you have any social platforms, but where can people find more and learn more about you and your work? And then we'll wrap it up with our last question that we end every single episode here with.
I think the best recommendation is go to my website, patrickwanis.com. There's a blog there. I've written like 1,400 articles because I've been writing an article every week since 2004. and the types of articles that I've referenced. So there is a great article on sleep. I'll also send you those links, but there are great articles on why we sleep and some of the other things that I mentioned, 60 things that every child needs, or the pain of being alone. If you felt alone and unsupported as a child, then you'll get a greater understanding of what you experienced through this article. On my website, you'll find the blog quite easily. There's also a page there on services, phone consultation, book a session. I work with clients all around the world over the phone, not even with video, not with Zoom, because you don't need to see me. We need to focus on the content, the voice tonality, and you need to be focused entirely on what we're doing, not on how you look or how I look, or if if there's a distraction. So they're the best ways to reach me, and there's plenty of
No,
free information on my
it's loaded. I mean,
website.
an article a week, since the early 2000s. Hats off to you. I mean, I know about consistency in creating
Thank you.
content. We've done a video every day on YouTube since July 28th of 2020. So we're approaching 2 years here of not missing
Wow.
a single day, which is something I feel very
Well done.
proud. I don't know if proud. Yeah, I mean,
Proud.
yeah, sure, I can be
Yeah.
proud about it. But it's
It,
changed. I mean, it's changed my life.
hold on. Frank, there's nothing wrong with feeling proud when you're proud about the right thing. If you're doing something that's good, then be proud of it. If you've hurt someone
Don't
because
be
you
proud
wanted to
of it.
get vengeance,
Yeah.
maybe you shouldn't feel proud. But pride, yeah, I know that they listed that as one of the 7 deadly sins, but that's not even in the Bible. That was something that was created. And again, everything depends on context. Pride, wouldn't you want to be proud of your son because he's connected to you and he's just done something great, or your daughter's done something great, or your husband or your wife, and you say, I'm proud of you? There's nothing wrong with that.
No, absolutely. And yeah,
You're
no,
not
I
a
appreciate it. I've been
narcissist.
called one a lot in my life, though. So, um,
Well, that's different.
yeah.
But if you're proud of you, you just told me, Patrick, I've just, for almost 2 full years, I've been recording a video every day. I go, what does that involve? It involves commitment. It involves devotion, dedication, discipline, persistency, consistency, resiliency, competence, as you mentioned, belief in your own capabilities, and the desire to help other people and the desire to create value. I just listed 12 qualities. Why would you not be proud of those specific 12 qualities? Because that's what
Yeah,
they
well,
are.
I really appreciate that, Patrick. I appreciate this conversation. This has been incredibly valuable. So guys, we'll get his blog, we'll get his website. Check it out, browse his site. Like there's tons and tons. I mean, Patrick has been at creating content, like he said, 1,400 plus articles. So Patrick, we end every episode here with the same question. Obviously, the title of the show is The Superhuman Life. We didn't really get a lot into it here today, but this has been this podcast, this work has been a result of my own, personal story and transformation. But when I talk about living a superhuman life, for me, Patrick, it's really it's a belief system. It's a way that I try to show up and operate and live in the world every single day. And it's coming from the place first that I do believe we're all put here for a purpose. I believe there's a calling on each one of our lives. Patrick has a calling in his life. Frank has a calling. Every single person tuning in, both on the audio and video side of this thing, has a specific calling on their life. But that's just half of the equation. We then have to take the responsibility. We have to show up daily, right? Like we have to grow. We have to be intentional about the work that we're doing and developing that purpose. So for me, living a superhuman life is being clear on what your purpose is and then taking aggressive and intentional action every single day to bring that purpose to the world for the service of other people. But I love to end the show here with getting the guest take. So Patrick Wanis, as we end today's show, how would you define living a superhuman life?
I think living a superhuman life is living to your potential and making a positive difference. And I think, I don't think it needs to be that deep. You've summed it up anyway. I'm just saying it a different way. It's, are you living your potential, and are you making a positive difference? Because does life actually have any meaning? It has the meaning that you choose to give to it. It's up to you to find out what your purpose, what your meaning in life is, because it's different to mine and different to the other person and different to 7 billion other people. So you got to find out what your meaning and purpose in life is, because that's what's going to keep you going. That's what's going to give significance and a sense of fulfillment to your life. It might be raising children. It might be taking care of your brother's children because your brother passed away. You got to find something that makes you feel significant, and not in a way that's using other people or using your power and influence over other people in a bad way, but something that gives you a sense of significance because you're making other people breathe a little easier, or you're bringing joy to other people, or you're helping set people free from the past. I mean, that's sort of my platform, to help set people free from the past so you can live life to its fullest. And so you find the meaning and purpose, and you also say, am I using my talents to their best abilities? We all have multiple talents, multiple passions. There's a great movie which featured Chaz Palmieri and Robert De Niro, A Bronx Tale. And the last line of the movie is about that the greatest disappointment or the greatest waste in life is wasted talent. So tap into your potential. You don't have to fulfill all of it, because you probably won't, because you're a human. How can you fulfill all of your potential? But if you feel like every day you're doing something that's meaningful, you've helped someone, you've made someone feel better about themselves, you've lifted their spirits, that's a great feeling. If you can help someone and just know that, wow, I brought value to someone else's life. Maybe I've made them feel a bit better. Mate, Frank, just a week ago, and I'll share this quickly because I know we've got to wrap up, but a week ago, I was on the ground with a husband and wife who were crying, screaming, wailing, and flailing their arms and head because their son had just committed suicide. I spent 4 hours with them on the floor, just holding them. I wasn't going to sit there and try to tell them anything. There's nothing I can say. There's nothing I can speak that's going to remove their pain. But I just held them. Didn't matter whether it's a man holding a man or a man holding someone else's wife, because this wasn't sexual. This was human. This was the human spirit of love and connection and care for others. And I'd never seen such pain and suffering, because I've never experienced that level of pain and suffering, losing a child. And two things came to my mind. The first one was, bloody hell, I didn't realize I could be this compassionate. I didn't even know this existed within me. I really shocked myself. And the second thing was, the whole family at different times, and even since then, have called me to thank me for some of the things that I did or the way that I helped. And one of the things that I did, I'll share this before I have the closing comment. He would go into a panic state, and I just grabbed his head. If you're watching this, you understand. I put my hand around each side of his head, and I turned it to me, and I said, look at me, just look at me, slow down. That's right. Breathe, keep looking at me, breathe. And I calmed him down. I did that about 15 times over about 7 hours. And so the final point is, the second thing that I walked away with was, I recognized I made a difference in someone. I actually helped someone. That was more meaningful than selling something, than making money. That wasn't something I was paid to do. Yeah, I get a lot of fulfillment from working with clients and receiving money for it, but this was done out of care for someone. So there's no hidden agenda. There's no ulterior motive. There's nothing to gain other than filling your soul with something that's good, which is, I've helped another human being. I haven't relieved his pain. I can't ever remove his pain, but I helped him through those moments, in those moments. And he knows, and she knows, that there's people that care about him. And that's it, mate. You've got to know that there's people that care about you. That's really important to your overall emotional well-being and emotional health. Are there people in your life that care about you? Do you feel that care? Did you feel that care as a child? And are you expressing that care to other people?
Patrick, you're an incredible storyteller. Thank you just for everything today. And thank you really here at the end. Just the way you were able to kind of articulate that experience, just that moment with them. I hope the audience really, really felt the love and compassion that was just coming out with your voice. So great place to end it. But like I said, I definitely want to open up the conversation and have you back on here, guys. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in here today. Really hope that this, brought some value to you. And if you're still here with us, we want to thank you, just for being here. And obviously the show is growing, and it's due to you. It's due to the audience out there. It's due to everybody that's checking in on us on every single week. So we want to continue to help us grow and get this message out there. You can support us in one or two ways. First off, if you haven't done so yet, make sure to leave us a 5-star rating and written review. But more importantly, if something that was shared here today resonated with you, and there's someone in your life that needs to hear this, do us a favor, but do them the blessing by sharing this conversation. But for Patrick Wanis, Frank Rich at the Superhuman Life, we love you guys. We'll see you next week.